You ever been on a flight? Maybe you're coming home from a business trip and all you want to do is kind of slip away for just a little while, but the person beside you will not shut up. You ever had this happen? Or maybe there's someone in the back that's loud. What are they doing? They're disturbing the peace. They're disturbing the peace. Or you ever been in a hotel room and you're trying to go to sleep and you hear parties in the hallways and parties going on next door, nothing like those paper thin walls in hotel rooms, you know. What are they doing? They're disturbing the peace. Or how about moms, you feel like you got everything tidied and taken care of. Kids are, in the rooms or in the bed, and you finally draw that hot bath, and you just now sat down, and then all of a sudden you hear a little one at the door. What are they doing? They're disturbing your peace. What if you could keep the peace? The title of today's message is Keep the Peace. Keep the peace. What if you could keep the peace? We're gonna look at a story today. We're gonna learn how to keep the peace, because I'm convinced that God has designed us and desires for us to be people of peace, people who carry peace, people who walk in peace, people who live in peace. Now most of us would define peace by how the dictionary defines peace, and that would be freedom from disturbance, quiet, and tranquility. That's how we typically would define peace. But in my mind, that's a spa. I don't know how much that's a peace. And listen, I like a spa. That spa life is great, right? You walk into a spa and they got that music just playing. Wouldn't that be amazing if that was the soundtrack of your life? What about the smell in the spa? Something about that smell, like it'd be great. But instead, we're assaulted by other smells and dominated by other sounds, right? But with all of those things, with chaos that's going on around us in our personal lives, with the chaos that's taking place in our region, in our world, I know there's some protests happening downtown Coeur d'Alene yesterday. What if in all of this chaos, in all of the turmoil, we could keep the peace? I think, though, that in an effort to keep the peace, what we're oftentimes doing in our individual lives, and I just want you to think about this if it's true for you, is that we are trying to find a temporary effort to get something that only God can give us, okay? You see, oftentimes, what we call peace is temporary escape. What we would call peace is just a momentary minute of peace. It's temporary escape. And Jesus actually wants to give you true peace. You see, temporary escape is counterfeit peace. Now, I don't know what your counterfeit peace is. Maybe it's Netflix. Hello, somebody. Maybe it's a glass of wine. Maybe it's fishing. Maybe it's eating. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's closing another deal, adding zeros. Maybe it's accomplishment. But these are all things, none of them which are bad in and of themselves, but they were never intended to bring you peace. But yet we use these things to try to get peace. And also, oftentimes what will happen in an attempt to get peace, sometimes you do something in a temporary moment that has lasting consequences. We find ourselves in manic moments, and I've found that most of us make some of our worst decisions in manic moments. We're either in moments that we're really high or we're really low. And when we're really high, we look for peace. And when we're really low, we look for peace. And we will make something in a temporary moment that has lasting consequences. And God doesn't want us to live this kind of life. He doesn't want us to live this kind of manic up and down life. So before we talk about how to get true peace, I want to ask you to do something right up front. I want to ask you to evaluate what in your life is a temporary escape for what only God can actually give. Just think about it. What is it that you are looking for peace in that only God can provide? You see, God wants you to see that peace isn't something you can lose, it's something that you give away. And a lot of us piece ourselves out, and that's why there's the pieces out. That's why we have no peace. In John chapter 16, these are Jesus's words. He says, I've told you this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world. Come on, Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and until you recognize that peace only comes from Jesus, you will find a legitimate need in an illegitimate way. And that's what a lot of us are doing in life right now. And I know that a lot of us, our peace is disturbed. And I'm not talking necessarily in the little ways, like little ones knocking on the door or someone bothering us that's at a hotel. I think our souls oftentimes get disrupted, do they not? They get disrupted by crisis. They get disrupted by tough relationships in our family. They get disrupted by unemployment. They get disrupted by news, the news feed. They get disrupted by the chaos and the crisis that's going on in the world, war and rumors of war and talks of debate about all the things, abortion and you name it, everything up and down. There's all these things. You know, there are some things that should unsettle us. There are some things that, should ruffle our tail feathers, if you will. Those things that are contrary to the kingdom of God should make us upset. But oftentimes, it's the things in our lives that we don't feel like we have control of that upsets us. But can I just go ahead and maybe put you at peace? You're not in control. Guess what? You are not God. And God is the only one who's in control. And listen, I know that's easier for me to say than for all of us to receive, but there's peace in just settling in and knowing that God is God and I am not. And there's some battles some of you are fighting right now that were never yours to fight. And God is inviting you to surrender today, to give up the fight and let him fight your fight. And so what we see is Jesus is going to invite us today to keep the peace. We're going to look at a story in which he taught the disciples a lesson about keeping the peace. And if you have your Bibles, you can turn to Mark chapter 4. That's where we're going to be today. We're going to camp right there. Mark chapter 4. I'm going to read this to you. It's a story that is familiar with many of you. For some of you, it'd be brand new. If you don't have a Bible, the verses will be on the screen behind me. But listen to what it says. Mark chapter 4, beginning in verse 35. That day when evening came, he said to the disciples, let's go over to the other side. And leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. Now, let's just pause right there. What's that mean? They took him just as he was. Well, they took him tired. Jesus is tired from a long day of work. Jesus is tired from a long day of ministry. You don't find Jesus ever riding anything until he rode a donkey into his crucifixion. So Jesus has been on his feet. Jesus has been pouring out day after day, all day long, and now they took him as he was. He was tired in the boat. Anybody understand what it means to be tired? Come on, we can all relate to this. Some of y'all are tired. I don't know how mamas do it. Y'all walk around y'all are walking zombies is what you are. It's incredible. I don't know how y'all do it, but you do it. And he's tired. And it says there were also other boats with him. And that's always interesting to me. That here's Jesus, not only the disciples following him, but others are following him. And can I just say as a side note, moms, dads, you got boats following you. You got little boats following you. Can I say to you, leaders, any leaders in the room, and you go, well, how do I know if I'm a leader? Well, look behind you. If anybody's following you, you're a leader. There are student leaders in here. There are adult leaders here. Leaders, if you're a leader, you need to know that other boats are following you. What do you do when the storm hits? Because what we're going to see is the storm's about to hit, and these other boats are following. And it matters who's in your boat. And it matters how you respond in a crisis. I just know in my life, as I look back, I've lost mom and dad now in the last couple years, but I look back at my life and I remember highs and lows. I don't remember the steady days. I remember the high and low days. I remember when the storms hit our family and how my dad responded or how my mom responded. And oftentimes, that's what we remember, and we have to consider this. That's just a side note. There are other boats following. There are boats following you. Mom, dad, there are boats following you, your kids. And listen, I knew you were aware, but so often we can kind of get lulled and forget that our kids learn from how we live, not so much by what we say. They're just watching you. and watching you, how you love one another and how you respond to that bad news you got on the phone. They're watching you, they're watching me. And so there was also other boats with them, and then a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. And Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. And the disciples woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" And he got up and he rebuked the wind and he said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And then the wind died down and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" It sounds like a lesson that Jesus had tried to teach him before. And I wonder what lesson Jesus continues to try to teach us. Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And they were terrified, and they asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." And it's interesting that they were afraid during the storm, but then Jesus calmed the storm, and they were terrified. They were terrified because they saw that the one who is able to calm the storm was in the storm with them. And that is a fresh perspective for us all to have. But have you noticed that great days are often followed by great storms? I don't know why that is, but it's so true. Oftentimes you'll have a great thing happen, and soon right after that, a really hard thing will happen. Great success and great affliction are oftentimes intermingled. And what we see right here from the start in this story is that no matter what is going on around us, we actually can have peace within us. Let me say that again. That's God's desire for your life. That no matter what is going on around us, God wants you to know that you can have peace within. And this is the lesson that Jesus is going to teach the disciples, and I hope that he teaches us today as we study his word, that no matter what circumstances going on, no matter what the weather conditions are in our life today, no matter what storms are brewing and is on their way in our life, for some of us, it's a crisis, it's a financial storm. For others of us, it's an emotional storm. We're struggling. We're struggling with our emotions. We're up and down. Some of us wrestle in a deep way with anxiety or depression. All these things are very real. These storms are blowing in. And Jesus says that no matter what is going on around you, I want you to learn that you can have peace within, okay? And one of the lessons we learn real quickly is that Jesus promises peace, but not the absence of storms, because he's in a storm. And not only that, Jesus is the one who invited him into the storm. You see, it's interesting here that we see both the human side of Jesus as well as the divine side of Jesus. We see his humanness and his divinity. We see a man who is tired, who needs to rest. And we also see a God who could command the storm to rest. Okay, so we see Jesus is in need of rest, but we also see that Jesus has power over rest. Can I just say, this is a word for someone here today. Rest does not mean weakness. Rest does not mean weakness. If you're one of those guys that's rise and grind, and you know what, I'll sleep when I get to heaven. Hey, I appreciate your tenacity and I appreciate your hard work ethic. I have that kind of same drive in me. But guess what? You're gonna rest either from intentionality or you're gonna rest from tragedy. You choose. Because we're made to work, but we're also made to rest. What did Jesus do on the seventh day? He rested. What is Jesus doing here? He's resting. And yes, we see the human side of Jesus, but we also see the divine side of Jesus, the one who has the ability to calm the storm. He walks them into this moment, and Jesus has invited the disciples into a boat to go to the other side, and because he's God, he knew that they would face a storm. And when they got in the boat, the weather seemed fair. Now, what we have to understand is that 4 of these disciples, at least 4 of them, were commercial fishermen. So they had a pretty good read on the water. They would have known, yeah, today it's okay. They would have looked at the sky. They would kind of felt the vibe of the air, the conditions of the air, and they would have known. But the body of water they were in, storms could roll in at any moment. This body of water surrounded by mountains, kind of like where we live. And this specific lake was 700 feet below sea level. And the winds, these thermals would come in. If you've ever been on Lake Ponderay over by the Monarch and out by the Clark Fork, these thermals kind of blow through every day through about 9 o'clock. And, the waves are always blowing and it's always high. Now, I get a little nervous on the water when the waves are like 3 feet. On this lake, on this body of water, they get 30 feet. Hello, somebody. But what Jesus wants us to understand, that it doesn't matter how high the waves get. It doesn't matter how hard the rain comes and how hard the wind blows. He wants you and I to find a place where we can keep the peace. Y'all say keep the peace. We want to learn how to keep the peace. And I think it's so important for us to consider because so many of us, though, have ascribed to a belief that if Jesus is in my boat, I shouldn't face a storm. I mean, come on, Jesus, I give you my life. You're supposed to be with me. I'm not supposed to go through hardship, right? There's this idea that if I'm living right, everything will be all right. Everything gonna be all right. Yeah. That if something's wrong, it must be because I'm doing something wrong or because I've done something wrong. And it's a wrong type of thinking. It's a broken type of thinking. Because isn't it true that we've all had storms just drop in? Wouldn't it be amazing if there was an app that announced crisis? Like your phone would just start blowing up and letting you know crisis is coming. But that's not the way storms come. Storms just show up unannounced. Crisis comes unannounced. And what I am learning in my life is don't get too settled when the water's settled. I don't need to put my peace in the circumstance and the condition of the day. I mean, just this past week, I was with a group of pastors from all over the nation. We were fishing on Lake Ponderay, and on one side of the lake we started and the water was glass. It was beautiful. But we got past that long bridge and started heading out, and all of a sudden we get hit by those thermals and the water is rough. Now, if I would have determined my day was going to be good and bad based off the condition of the water and the wind, I'd have been upset. But you know what? I've learned as a fisherman and I've learned in life, I can't let my day be determined by the weather. If my day is going to be good or bad, I can't let it be determined by the weather. Sometimes you fish in the rain. Sometimes you live life and you go through hard times, and sometimes the wind is blowing really hard, and sometimes, man, it is blue sky and it's sunshine. But how can we keep the peace? This is what we learned, okay? But what we see about the disciples, their response is oftentimes what our response is, that when the storm raged, they thought the worst about Jesus. I mean, did you see that? They get all hot and bothered. They get upset with Jesus. Look at it. It says in verse 38, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" They thought they were going to die. And they questioned how he could let it happen. I mean, they knew that Jesus loved them, but they halfway thought he was cruel. They acknowledged his power, but when he didn't use his power the way they expected him to use his power, they are now calling foul on Jesus. Jesus, don't you care if we drowned? And what I'm learning in my life through hard times and storms is that it's one thing to acknowledge Jesus as my Lord, and it's completely another to have a trusting faith in my Lord. A trusting faith. A faith that says, come hell or high water, I will bring you high praise. Come pain in my life, come struggle in my life, come death come in my life, come up or down in my life, I will bring you praise. I will learn to keep the peace. Jesus wants us to learn to keep the peace. And one of the things that he teaches us, a peace principle, if you will, is that don't mistake the presence of your storm with the absence of God. And they really couldn't do this because Jesus is right there. But I have a feeling that if Jesus wasn't in the stern, they would have been like, man, because of the storm, God must not be with us. Just because there's a storm in your life doesn't mean God's not with you. Just because there's a storm in your life doesn't mean that God doesn't hear you. Just because there's chaos in your life, hurt in your life, darkness in your life, struggle in your life does not mean that Jesus is not with you. The disciples were in the storm with Jesus in the boat. And oftentimes God won't speak to you in the storm through your senses. I've just learned in some of the hardest times in my life that God speaks to me in a different way. And I learned to hear his voice and recognize his voice in a different way. I want you to think about when a storm shows up. When a storm shows up, your senses are compromised anyway. You can't see clearly. Your hearing is drowned out by the wind and the rain. And so I think it's by God's grace that when the storm comes, he speaks to us differently because we're not seeing clearly anyway. And so maybe you would look at your storm right now, and right now you're looking for God, but maybe he wants you to teach you to hear God. Maybe he wants to teach you to hear his voice. Or maybe you're trying to hear his voice, and maybe he wants you to find his voice in the deep, in the secret places. In those moments when you draw away, he wants you to be able to lean in a little bit more. You know, you ever been in a situation where it's kind of loud and someone's trying to talk and you're like, you have to kind of just lean in a little bit more, you know, and some of us are like, you know, like you kind of lean in a little bit more, and maybe just maybe in this storm, Jesus wants you to lean in. Maybe in this storm, Jesus is inviting you into more intimacy, into more closeness so that you know his voice and that you would obey his voice. And this is the place Jesus wants to get us, okay? Because here's the thing about Jesus. The storm is near his body, but it's nowhere near his soul. And you may be in a storm today, but you can learn to keep the peace where that storm does not have an effect on your soul. See, he wants us to have a faith in him and a trust in him that no matter what the storm is doing on the outside, come on, we have peace on the inside. And this is attainable. This is something that we are able to have. This is not preacher talk. This is not me trying just like to, encourage you today. This is something that God has for all of us, but there's a tension that we have to wrestle with, a question that we have to be honest with, and that's this question. It's the one they wrestled with. Is God indifferent to my storm? Has he put my voice on mute? Has God stopped listening to me because I'm in pain and it doesn't seem like he cares? I'm hurting and it doesn't seem like he hears me. And what we have to understand is that God is never indifferent, okay? Sometimes God allows natural laws to play out in their natural course, even though it brings harm to us. And in these times, we tend to cry out against nature and even against God. Listen, I didn't want my dad to die. I didn't want my mom to die. I didn't want my daughter to have open heart surgery at the age of 3 months. I didn't want my son to get hit by a car and almost die. Didn't want to have to go through some relational loss and the pains that I've had to experience in planting this church. And I can go on and you can list the pains that you didn't want to happen in your life either. But we tend to think when things in our life are out of control that God has lost control. But can I just tell you right now, that's a tactic of the devil. And the devil will oftentimes attack you in things to make you question whether God is with you. And if it is by the enemy attacking your things that you begin to question God, then you have to ask yourself, is my hope in my things or my hope in my God? Because when things begin to be taken away from us and circumstances aren't as we wished, it really is a litmus test of where we've placed our trust. And I know that's a hard thing to say. Sometimes the things of God are hard sayings. But I'm telling you, there is a deep well of living water that we can tap in today as the people of God if we'll kind of lean in and listen for the voice of God in the midst of the storm. There's a trusting that must come. There's a trusting that must come. There's the intimacy that he's pulling you into. There's a closeness that he wants you to experience. He wants you to know him like you've never known him before. Maybe you've been praying that. God, unveil yourself to me. And what if he's unveiling himself to you through your pain and through your storm and through your hardship? God will allow these things. And so there is a belief that must grab a hold of our fearful hearts that God in his sovereignty will use, listen to me, all things for his glory and our good. And can I just speak that over your storm today? It's for his glory and your good. I know it doesn't feel good right now, but it's for his glory and your good. And the sooner that we can rest in that, the quicker the peace comes. The quicker we can keep the peace. That you can say, you know what, God, I don't understand this. I would never have chosen this, but I trust you. I don't understand why you are allowing this storm in my life, but I am not God and you are. Your ways are higher than my ways. Your thoughts are higher than my thoughts. God, I'm not God and I surrender. I give my ways to you. I give you this storm. I am yours. I want you to think about it this way. Gold is put into a furnace. Why? Because it's gold. Gold's put into a furnace because it's gold. And so today in a storm, you may feel like it's a furnace, but guess what? It means it's your gold. And God will use a storm. He'll allow a storm, some of which maybe he had nothing to do with. It's this natural law taking place. Other times, we're in a storm because of whose boat we're in. Just ask Paul and Jonah. Like sometimes you have storms and you go through storms because of the people in your boat. And sometimes it's because of just the natural consequences of choices that we've made. But regardless, God has an ability to use the storm to teach us about himself, and it always will be, if we'll allow it, it will always be for his glory and our good. And gold is put into the furnace because it's gold. And maybe you think that God does not love you or care for you because he didn't work a miracle or he didn't deliver you from the hell you're going through. I mean, Job said, I looked on my right and I looked on my left and you were not there. And that's the way we all feel at some point. God, I'm looking all around and I don't see you. I used to come to your house to sing and experience you and I don't feel you. I don't see you and I don't feel you and all I feel is my pain. I looked to my left and I perceived you not and I'm hurting. What I'm discovering is sometimes God works a greater miracle when he sustains us through the storm rather than delivering us from the storm. When he sustains us, when he upholds us in the storm. I mean, what's a greater miracle? For there be a burning bush and that bush not be consumed, or for that bush to start burning and God put the fire out? The greater miracle is that the bush was burning and it continued to burn. It was not consumed. And that is your life. If you're in a storm today, a storm that you feel like is never going away, you're not consumed. You're not dead, so God's not done. He's still up to something for his glory and your good. And that's on some of y'all's nerves right now. I know, I get it. You're like, the hell with that Pace. This hurts. This hurts, but trust me, speaking from a guy that has gone through some pain and some hell, don't let the devil distract you. Don't let the devil lie to you. And don't let the devil steal your joy just because he messes with some stuff around you. You know, I've had times in my life that it seemed to be the case that God was silent, that it seemed to be the case that God had hid his face from me. And finally, one day, I heard from him almost as if he had said it to me every day. It was just one of those kind of moments. And I felt like he said to me, are you not able to worship me in the silence and in the darkness? Are you not able to worship me even in the pain? can you trust me no further than you can see me? And then I had to make a choice because I, like you, love the Lord. But I had realized that I allowed the circumstance and the conditions around me to dictate my peace. And I decided, you know what, I'm gonna keep the peace. I'm gonna keep the peace. And I can keep the peace because peace keeps me. I'm kept by my Savior, and so are you. How do we keep the peace? We can keep the peace because peace has kept us. And it's nothing that we have to strive in. It's nothing that oh man, I've just gotta keep the peace. It's not a mindset. No, peace keeps you. And it's when you rest in that, you rest in knowing that peace is keeping me. Peace, be still. Peace is with me. Jesus confronted their faith in their storm because it's the only way they could see that they didn't have peace. They were thinking they had peace. We're rolling with Jesus. Seeing miracles, casting out demons. We got the peace until they faced a storm. And then they realized, oh, we don't have peace. And sometimes God in his grace and his sovereignty will allow us to go through a storm to show us whether we have peace. And it's all to bring us closer. I want you to hear that today. It's all to bring us closer. Let me tell you something. The enemy is not after your house. He's not after your promotion. He's not after your car. Satan is after your mind. And he will attack the areas in your life to get in your head. And if your peace is in your stuff, then he takes your stuff and he will take your peace. Is your strength and your peace in your stuff? Is your strength and your peace in your comfort? I want to invite Miss Lori to come up. She's going to help me illustrate this. Jesus says, peace I leave with you. John 15. And the peace in which Jesus is talking about is the advocate, the Holy Spirit. And he's like, look, it's to your good that I go because I'm going to leave with you peace, the advocate. And peace is meant to be found on the inside, not from what is happening on the outside. But let's just be honest. So many of us love that spa life, bubble boy living, right? We love it when things are tranquil. It would be amazing if the playlist was peaceful. Miss Lori, could you play something peaceful? Maybe you want to just slip away for a moment. Wouldn't it be amazing if that was the playlist going on all the time? Kids start getting on your nerves, cue the playlist. Bosses on your nerves, financial crisis hits, anxiety grabs a hold of you again, and you could just slip away. But the reality is, the only thing that's predictable in life is that it's unpredictable. Come on, am I right? It's variably invariable, always. The only thing I can guarantee you tomorrow that's gonna happen in my life is something I didn't expect. That's what's gonna happen. That's just the way life happens. Now, Miss Lori, if you'll play something with more drama, more chaos. Now that's what life sounds like, right? Maybe tranquil for a moment, but for most of us, our kids need us. We got bills to pay. Our marriage may be struggling. Someone is in the hospital. Traffic is nuts. The in-laws are driving you crazy. They've stayed over way too long once again. The baby, don't look to your in-laws right now. The baby won't stop crying, right? And it's just chaos in this drama. Now watch this. Now, depending on the music that's playing, my heart was either racing or at peace and calm, right? And Jesus has taken these disciples out into a lake knowing that they would go through a storm because he's wanting to show them that their faith and their peace is tied up in what's going on around them instead of what's within them, instead of who's with them. Jesus is in the boat. Can I just say to you, Jesus is in the boat. Jesus is in the boat. If you're a Christ follower today, Jesus is in the boat. Peace with you. That's why Jesus says, listen, you can take heart. I have overcome the world. And Jesus said, I'm going to give you a peace that passes all understanding, and that's a crazy peace. And they had to wake up Jesus to tell him that there was a storm. And he wakes up out of his sleep. He walks up to the front of the boat and he says, peace be still, and the winds and the waves calm. And you cannot speak peace from a place you do not abide. So some of you are trying to speak peace over your situation, but your heart is chaotic. And you can't speak something that you're not dwelling in, that you're not abiding in. So learn to rest. Rest is not weakness. Learn to allow Jesus in your boat to be your confidence. I may not have a job, but I got Jesus. I may not be healed, but I got Jesus. I may not have a dad, but I got Jesus. I may not have friends, but I got Jesus. I may not have that deal, but I got Jesus. And my confidence is in Jesus. My confidence is that Jesus is in the boat. Isaiah 43, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. Listen to me. It matters who's in your boat. It matters who's in your boat. And some of you are in the situation you're in because of who's in your boat. Some of you need to get out of that boat. Some of you need to kick them out of your boat. But you better make sure that Jesus is in your boat. Because who's in your boat? It makes sense to have someone in your boat that has command over the storm, does it not? And that is what's available to you and to me today. And for some of us today, those of us that are Christ followers, this message is just a reminder. It's just a reminder that he is with you, that he's not gonna leave you, that he's never gonna forsake you. But sometimes we're blinded by the storm. We're blinded by the hardship. And Jesus says to you, I am with you, take heart. Peace be still. He speaks that over your life today. Just as he spoke over those tumultuous waters out there on that body of water, he speaks that over your pain. He speaks that over your hardship. He speaks that over the chaos, the loss in your life. He says, peace be still. And in closing, you know what I've discovered that storms do? Storms show me who I really am. And this is what the disciples learned. When the disciples got in the boat, they thought they had peace. But then the storm came, and the storm put up a mirror. And in that mirror, they saw someone who had placed their faith in their circumstances and not in Jesus. And Jesus used the moment to show them. Jesus used the circumstance in the storm to show them, listen, you've not trusted me with your heart. What did he ask them? He said, where is your faith? And maybe that's what he's asking you today. For the Christ follower, he asks you, where's your faith? Is your faith in me, or is your faith in the circumstance? Is your faith in what the doctor has said, or is your faith in what I've said? Is your faith in what the bank says, or your faith in what I say? Is your faith, where's your faith? Those of you that are not Christ followers, where's your faith? He asks you the same thing. Is your faith in, has your faith in you just, doing life and trying to find strength in yourself and fulfillment in yourself? Where's your faith? All of us have the same action item today, whether we know Jesus or we don't know Jesus. We have to have our faith restored. We have to put our faith in him. We have to say, sometimes, you know what? Here's the defining moment for those of you that are Christ followers. Maybe right now you don't feel any different on the end of this message as you did from the beginning. But what God is going to ask you to do is to sing his praise anyway. That's faith. It's to align your heart up to what is true about him, regardless of what your circumstance in your life says. That's faith.